Hi everyone, it's Danielle with Northlawn Flower Farm. Well, I'm really excited to shoot this video for you today because it's going to be all about one of my favorite concepts when it comes to gardening, and that is starting cool flowers inside for a fall planting. Last year I was able to shoot a video when I did my direct seeding in early September. About September 10th is when I put my cool flowers in the ground, but I was sick in mid-August last year and I wasn't able to shoot this video for you. So I wanted to let you know, and sorry if you hear construction today, it's just kind of the way it is, but I always start my cool flower transplants right in the middle of August. It's currently August 16th. I've started about half of my cool flowers last night. I'll start the other half tonight, and then I'll be done with my transplants for the fall. I'll grow those transplants on inside my home for about 5 weeks, and at the same time I direct sow my cool flowers in the ground, I'll be moving those transplants out into the garden on that same exact date, September 10th, give or take a week or two, weather dependent always. So in today's video, I just want to talk once again about what a cool flower is, especially leaning into the benefits of fall planting. I also want to answer some questions that I see over and over again, and I'm so sorry if I see a question so often. It's obvious that I haven't been very good in describing that particular issue, so we'll be talking about row covers, which ones I choose to grow and why, which ones that haven't worked for me. I'm also going to do just kind of a rapid fire round. I looked at the cool flowers list, and at this point I've grown 28 of the 30 cool flowers. So I'm just going to read through the list and just say, here's exactly what I do for that flower, when I plant it, how I plant it, and hopefully that'll be helpful. Now, before we get too far into this video, I want to give full credit to Lisa Mason Ziegler, who taught me this concept through her book, Cool Flowers. I picked up cool flowers 6 years ago. I think I just probably Googled cut flower farm and her book came up. But when I read it, I thought this is a concept that I have never heard about before. And wouldn't it be amazing to gain a whole nother season of gardening, a whole nother season of cut flowers, and then the benefit be that these spring flowers are stronger, have longer stems, are more robust, are more disease resistant, you know, sign me up. And so I tried it, I keep trying it, I keep experimenting with this concept here in my zone, and I'm always just blown away the difference between a fall or a very early spring planted cool flower versus trying to plant these flowers in kind of the heat and humidity of our summers here. It's a night and day difference. Now, with that being said, let's move on to what is a cool flower? When do we plant cool flowers? And let me show you what I have going on here in mid-August. So a cool flower is an annual, a hardy annual that wants to be grown and does best when grown in cooler temperatures. So we're all familiar with things like pansies and violas, but those are bedding annuals generally speaking. But there's an entire wonderful world of cut flowers that are also cool season flowers that want to be planted either in the fall if they're hardy in your zone, or in the very early spring if they're not hardy in your zone. And so that really leads us into when to plant cool flowers. And before we dive into that, we need two important pieces of information. We need to know what our hardiness zone is, because that tells us whether or not we can fall plant a cool flower. If a cool flower is hardy in my zone or lower, meaning cooler, I 100% of the time want to fall plant that flower because it's going to give me a stronger plant, a more disease resistant plant, a taller stem at the end of the day when it comes to cutting it later on in the spring, and just overall it's better for the plant. That's what the plant wants. However, if a flower is not hardy in my zone, so I'm here in zone 6, so let's say straw flower is hardy only to zone 8, I'm not going to fall plant that flower. Instead, I'm going to wait and plant it in very early spring. And the second piece of information we need is our first and last expected frost date so that we can know when to plant cool flowers, because fall planted cool flowers are going to go into the ground about 6 to 8 weeks before your first fall frost. And very early spring planted cool flowers are going to go into the ground 6 to 8 weeks before your last expected spring frost. So I hope that makes sense. And then of course the last thing to decide is, am I going to direct seed a flower, or am I going to start it inside and plant it out as a transplant? And this is what I get the most questions about, and then probably row covers, which we'll touch on next. So it's definitely all about what's best for that particular seed. Is that seed going to thrive when I direct seed it out into the garden, or is it going to thrive when I start it inside and then plant it out? All that information can be found on page 138 of Cool Flowers. Lisa tells us exactly which flowers to start inside and which flowers to directly sow out in the garden. But today I'm going to tell you exactly which flowers I start inside and then plant out in the fall as a transplant. So what I have going this year is Rudbeckia, Campanula, Sweet William, Scabiosa, Feverfew, Yarrow, and Foxglove. Those are all things that do better started inside and then transplanted out in the fall 6 to 8 weeks before the first frost. So now let's move on to a bit of Q&A, and I'm really excited about this because I get the same questions kind of over and over again, and I'm so sorry for not addressing them in the video. The number one question that I get hands down is about row covers. So this is something that, once again, I think is climate specific, and that I do completely opposite of what's recommended in the Cool Flowers book. So in Cool Flowers, and I believe what Lisa still does, is that she uses row covers to protect her cool flowers. And what she also recommends is taking kind of off the row covers if you're going to be getting an extreme snow. The reason why that does not work for me here in 6B, where it's always snowing or raining or icing, is that times when I've tried to use row cover, I am like constantly on, off, on, off, on, off. And then sometimes we'll get so much snow to where I can't put the row cover back on, and they're covered with snow and ice anyway. Or what happens that's even worse a lot of times is, you know, if I go out of town for work for one day and we get this big snow load followed by ice, my row cover freezes to my hoops, and it could be weeks before I'm able to remove it without ripping it off. A lot of times the row covers collapse onto the transplant. And so just hear my heart on that. It's not that I think that row covers are bad or that that is bad advice, but it's bad advice for me, Danielle, living here in 6B, where it's always snowing, raining, and icing over the winter. It's better for me to just let those transplants get all that weather and to then see which cool flowers can handle that. Some can't, and we will discuss that as we get further into the video. You know, which cool flowers say they're hardy in my zone, but perhaps because I don't use row cover, and probably even more likely because of this continual moisture that I deal with, which cool flowers generally don't survive, not due to loss from how cold it is, but due to loss from how wet these transplants stay. And so actually, let's just talk about those flowers right now before we move on. The main one, which I have now tried to fall plant, this would have been year 5 trying to fall plant it, is Snapdragons. Snapdragons are hardy down to zone 4, but I continue to lose too many to make it worth doing a fall planting. Once again, take everything into consideration. I'm not using any row cover. I get tons of rain, snow, and ice. It is windy here, but I have created a 360 windbreak around the property, so wind is not really an issue here for me. It's really just that moisture. So what has always happened with my Snapdragons is, say I plant 100 Snapdragons. 50 of them will do okay, but they'll almost all struggle. It's not as if the Snapdragons are benefiting from me doing a fall planting. And that's the thing too with cool flowers. The longer I do it, what I want to fall plant is things that 100% of the time benefit from being fall planted, because if it's not benefiting me at the end of the day to fall plant them, I might as well plant them in very early spring instead if I'm still going to get a great usable flower at the end of the day. So Snapdragons, I think, are the only flower that say they're hardy in my zone, which I no longer will do a fall planting. And the only other flower that I've lost is one that said it wasn't hardy in my zone and I just wanted to push the limit with it. So Dara is listed in the book as hardy to zone 7, but I feel very confident saying that it's hardy here in zone 6B because it's overwintered beautifully for what will be the 6th year. And so since I saw Dara overwinter so well, I thought, well, all the Amis must overwinter also. But what my experience has been, and I do not know why this is that the different Amis act differently in my garden. So Ami Magus, which is your white Ami, or more like standard white dill, some people call it, I'm able to overwinter that one here in 6B. But last year I grew the green mist Ami. Sorry, I can't remember the botanical on that, but I lost every single plant, and it was definitely due to a very late ice storm that we got. So I'm so sorry, I can't say why that is. I'm just kind of sharing an experience that I had. I wouldn't say I would give up on it, but I also I don't think I'll try it again because I know I can do a very early spring planting of it and get a great crop. And if I do that fall planting and lose that seed again, it's just money that I've lost. Another question I often see is how to decide which flowers from cool flowers to plant. Maybe you're just getting started and you just want to try a few. Maybe you have a smaller space like myself. For me, what I try to do is look at all the cool flowers and select one of every flower form. That way I know I can have a complete bouquet with my cool flowers. A lot of the cool flowers are spike flowers like foxglove, larkspur, delphinium, lambada. These are all spike flowers. So if I was looking through the flowers and say just thinking about color, I might end up with all spike flowers or all filler flowers or all spray flowers. So instead of that, I try to break it down by flower form, choosing one spike, larkspur, one filler, nigella, one spray flower like feverfew, one disc flower like yarrow, and that's how I determine what I'm going to grow. That way I have all the flower forms represented in cool flower form so that when I go to make a bouquet in the spring, I have all those wonderful elements to work with. Definitely that was a mistake that I made early on, was I grew like all the spikes because I just personally love those flowers. But then when it came to making bouquets, it was really challenging because all I had was spikes. All I had was snapdragons, larkspur, foxglove. I think, it probably makes sense, right? The other thing I think about is also what are my focal flowers that aren't cool flowers that are going to be blooming at that time of year, and what colors have I chosen to grow that particular season. Generally in the spring, I'm growing whites, I'm growing peaches, I'm growing pinks. Sometimes I'm growing merlots, depending on whether or not I'm selling to a florist that year. But I take those focal flower colors and also weigh that into what I'm going to grow. Another question I'm often asked is, do I succession plant my cool flowers? That's not something that I really do because I feel like the main benefit is that when you do the fall planting of these flowers, like I said at the beginning, you're rewarded with plants that are often taller than yourself. I'm 5'5". A lot of these cool flowers end up being taller than me when they're fall planted. They're super strong, robust. The stems are so thick. And they are more disease resistant because they're already been established and they're able to thwart off any attacks that would come at them. Pests generally do not attack healthy plants. So by getting them established early on, you're just setting yourself up for success in terms of integrated pest management. And then I think the final question that I often see is, when does this group of flowers start blooming? So it's definitely going to vary dependent on your zone and your first and last frost date. But for me here in zone 6B, where my average first frost is late October and my average last frost is right around the middle of April, My fall planted cool flowers start to bloom late May into June. I will get some blooms early May, but it's really not enough to say that the cool flowers are all in bloom. The cool flowers are kind of all in bloom for me late May into June. So what I'm really pairing these cool flowers with are things like ranunculus, anemones, and peonies. So friends, I hope that's helpful, and I continue to experiment and learn and experiment more and again to make sure I'm getting the same results each year. And that's the fun thing with cool flowers, is that you can experiment. You don't have to experiment on a big scale. You can do just a small section, half of a raised bed. Maybe the one year I just said, you know what, I'm gonna try every single thing that's listed as hardy in zone 7. I'm gonna do a fall planting and see what happens. And I learned that Dara over and over again, 5 years in a row, 6 years maybe, Dara has overwintered for me here in 6B, even though it's listed as 7. And if I hadn't tried, I wouldn't know, right? So now I'm just gonna quickly go through all the cool flowers, and I'm gonna tell you exactly what I choose to do here in my climate for these particular flowers. I did a deep dive where I discussed every single one of these flowers and my experience with them. This is gonna be more for the purpose of just saying, here's the flower, here's when I started, and here's whether or not I started inside or directly sow it, and I hope it will be helpful. As a reminder, I'm here in zone 6B, southern Pennsylvania, with a very wet climate, and I don't use row covers. So corn cockle, winter hardy in zone 7. I direct seed it in very early spring. However, I don't grow it anymore because I don't find it as valuable and beautiful as something like a saponaria, and I choose to grow saponaria instead. Both the Ami Magus, the white one and the green mist, are listed as hardy to a zone 7. I've tried it both ways, fall and spring. At this point, I'm landing on doing a spring planting. I prefer to just sow it directly into the garden. It seems to do just fine. Dill is listed as hardy to a zone 8. I would definitely agree with that. I do a spring planting. I direct sow it out into the garden. I do not use dill as a cut flower. Instead, I use it in order to attract beneficial insects to my garden. Snapdragons are listed as hardy to zone 4. However, as I said earlier, after 5 years of trying to do a fall planting of snapdragons, instead, I start group 1 and 2 approximately around February 7th. I plant them out into the garden on about March 17th, and they're giving me a first harvest around June 7th. Ornamental kale is listed in here as hardy to zone 7. I don't grow that because of the pest pressure the kale brings to my garden. Bupleurum is listed as hardy to zone 5. I definitely direct sow that in the fall with great success. Calendula is listed as hardy in zone 7. I've grown calendula many years. I don't think it's worth starting it inside, direct sow it into the garden, but I don't grow it as a cut flower anymore because I find its stem too sticky and too short. Canterbury Bells is listed as hardy in zone 5. It's recommended that we start it indoors, and this is the first year that I'm ever growing it, so I'll let you know how it goes. Next up is bachelor's buttons. Those are hardy to a zone 6, and I direct seed them in the fall with great success. One of my favorite cool flowers, and I think the easiest cool flower to get established and to overwinter here in zone 6. Dara is listed as hardy to zone 7. I have found for the past 5 years that it is hardy here in zone 6B. I have tried direct sowing it, I have tried it inside, and I now feel that direct sowing it is best. It's not worth the space under my lights or the additional cost of the potting soil to start it inside. So I directly sow Dara in the fall here in 6B. Delphinium I've touched on briefly. It's hardy down to a zone 3. Definitely a seed you want to start inside. I grow it some years, I don't grow it other years, but overall I feel that larkspur is a better investment for where I live. Next up is larkspur. It's hardy down to a zone 6. Definitely do a fall planting of larkspur. It's a night and day experience, and larkspur likes to get established when it's cold outside. Sweet William is hardy down to a zone 5. Sweet William is one that I always start inside. The seed is very expensive because I have to buy pelleted seed. Transplant it out into the garden in the fall. Lisianthus, I've touched on this in other videos before. I've tried it for many years. I have some Lisianthus right here. I grow Lisianthus more for special events that might come my way. I don't grow a large amount of Lisianthus before because I sell at a farm stand, and so really I would rather grow a zinnia rather than a Lisianthus. But Lisianthus is hardy down to a zone 7, and of course we always want to start Lisianthus from seed inside the home. It takes very long to get going. Next up is Bells of Ireland. Bells of Ireland is hardy to a zone 7, and I find Bells of Ireland always does best directly sown in the garden. You can either sow it in the fall or in the spring directly in the garden here in 6B. This is one where I don't see a huge difference in the performance of the plant, fall to spring planting, and I'm not really sure why. But what I'm choosing to do this year is plant my Bells of Ireland in the spring, because when I really analyzed how much loss I was taking over the winter, I thought the plant is not that much more robust after doing a fall planting. So this year I'm doing a very early spring planting. Lambada, which is the annual form of Monarda, is hardy to zone 7. I start those seeds inside in very early spring and transplant them out into the garden in very early spring. Love and a Mist is hardy in a zone 6. I always direct sow Love and a Mist into the garden in the fall, and it's absolutely fabulous. Orlea, also known as white lace flower, is hardy down to a zone 6. Lisa is recommending both versions, so indoors and outdoors. I've tried both. I feel it does just fine directly sown into the garden as long as you keep it moist until established. So that's what I do now. Black-Eyed Susan is hardy down to a zone 5. That is one that I feel does better started inside and then transplanted out in the fall. And so that's one that is currently on a heat mat inside my house here on August 16th. Next up is Pincushion Flower, which is listed as hardy down to a zone 7. I am yet again trying to push the limit on Pincushion Flower. I've tried it in the fall before with varying degrees of success. I'm trying again because I feel like it might have just been that particular raised bed was too moist. So I'm trying it in a raised bed where I know the soil is my own soil and it's really good free draining soil. I always start Scabiosa inside the home as a transplant and plant it out. This year I'm planting it out in the fall, but I have planted it out, and I can show you too, in very early spring. We still have that round blooming right now here in the middle of August. My very early spring planting of Pincushion Flower is still in bloom right now. Feverfew is hardy down to a zone 5. It's definitely one that I feel like benefits from being started inside the home and transplanted out in the fall. And then we have Throatwort, which I'm sorry, I've never grown that one before, but it says it's hardy to a zone 7. And then I noticed something in preparing for today's video, which is on this appendix, that yarrow is not listed here for some reason. I think it's probably just, an oversight. But yarrow is one that if I was starting another round of yarrow this year, I would start it right now as a transplant inside the home and plant out that transplant in the fall here in 6B. I don't have the hardiness zone in front of me, but I will look it up and put it on the screen. So friends, it's a lot of information to unpack when it comes to cool flowers, but it's just so much fun. It's just so fun to experiment, learn, try new things. And it's a great way too to be able to continue to garden during these seasons that are really much more enjoyable to be outside, especially if you live in a humid, hot climate like myself, to be able to get back out here, as we go into fall and flip all the beds and be able to watch these baby plants grow and nurture them through the winter, and then to really just see them take off and benefit from the fact that I planted them in the fall. I mean, it's all about the plants, right? We always want to do what's best for these plants. And I guess, if there's no other takeaway from this, why not just give it a try? No need to spend a bunch of money or, try every single cool flower in the book. Maybe you just try bachelor's buttons. Maybe you just try nigella. Maybe you just try a larkspur and see what it's like. See the difference in the quality of the plant. Grow one stand of larkspur that's fall sown, and then plant one stand of larkspur after your last frost. you will be a believer. I promise you, the quality of the plant is unmatched. So friends, I think that brings us to the end of today's video. Let me know if you have any questions. I want to wish you a great day, and I'll see you sometime soon. Bye.